What's up again, everybody? I'm Clayton. Welcome back to Ages of Film, and today we're reviewing The Conjuring Part 2. Released in 2016, directed by James Wan, and starring Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. I can never pronounce her name right, but you guys know who I'm talking about. That's what we're doing today. I already reviewed the first Conjuring movie, so you guys can go check out my thoughts on that one in the archives. And in that review, I did mention that The Conjuring 2 was actually my favorite of the Conjuring movies, so why not drop a review of The Conjuring 2, right? Give my in-depth thoughts on this movie. But before we get into it, I just want to say what is up to any of my new subscribers out there. Thank you very much for being here, for joining the pack. Don't forget to smash that like button, you freaks. And if you haven't subscribed already and you're enjoying the content, man, hit that subscribe button. It's another way to help out the channel. Thanks also to all my subs, long-term guys out there. Appreciate you guys. So, hope you all had a good Halloween, good spooky season. Mine was pretty busy. You never know what life is going to throw at you, man. Life throws curveballs sometimes, and you just got to swing. And whether you swing and miss or whether you swing and knock it out of the park, you just got to go for it. So, crazy things been happening, but, we're keeping our chin up and eyes on the prize, and moving forward. So Conjuring 2 review, here we go. Let's get into it. Starting as always with the positives, working my way to the negatives. I love this movie. I gave the first Conjuring, spoiler alert if you haven't seen that review, I gave it 4 stars, 4 out of 5. So that's a really great review. So if I like The Conjuring 2 even more than the first one, obviously you can probably expect where this movie's gonna fall for me as far as rating wise. It's gonna be a pretty strong rating. Therefore, I'm not gonna have a whole lot of negatives to say about this movie because it's a great film. So, but I'll kind of talk a little bit about why I like Conjuring 2 over the first one, what it is about this movie that I'm enamored with. I feel like the consensus out there, the majority of people, it feels like are more the camp that the first Conjuring is the best. And I can understand that. The first Conjuring is a great film, and I love the first Conjuring. So I'm probably in the minority with this opinion, and that's cool. It's not the only movie that I'm in the minority on as far as my thoughts on it. So it's nothing new for me, but yeah, you like what you like, and to each his own. Let me know your thoughts on The Conjuring 2 in the comment section. All I ask that you be respectful about your opinion and be respectful to my opinion, and we can have good conversations there. So getting into the positives with Conjuring 2, one thing that I love about the first 3 Conjuring movies is that they are loosely based on true stories. And I say loosely based because they do take the liberty to Hollywoodize the films to an extent, which is understandable. But they are based on true stories, and that's something that I like. However, there can be some issues with basing a movie on true stories, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit in the negatives. But when you know that the movie is based on a true story, for me personally, it allows me to invest in the story more and in the characters more, because they're representing events that really happened and characters and people that really experienced these events. So it makes it more interesting for me. I'm naturally more intrigued by this true story and by these people and what they experience than I would be in just in a totally original script or film or whatever. So yeah, I do like the story. I like that it's based on a true story. I like that this movie, for me, the story here also, it's got a lot of heart to it. I feel that, and this is one thing that I do think it does better than the first one on it, and that is putting some heart into the film, having more of an emotional impact on me than the first one did, in the sense that in the first one, it was the mom, right, that was possessed, and they had to, do the exorcism on her. In this one, it's one of the kids. And I've said it before, anytime that you have kids involved in the plot, it raises the stakes. It puts more on the line when your kid is the one whose life or soul is on the line. So for me, because it's one of the kids that, the plot is kind of built around, to me, it adds more heart, adds more of an emotional layer there. It gives me more of an emotional punch. I want this girl to make it out. I don't want anything to happen to her. It raises the stakes in that regard, because it's more focused on the soul of a kid, which you naturally, I think, sympathize with more, care about more. Not saying that you don't with the mom in the first one, but again, when it's a kid on the line, when it's a kid that the plot is focused around, I think it raises the stakes a little and adds a little bit more emotional depth to it. But I also think that they add more of an emotional layer to the Warrens in this film. Their story, they build on their story from the first one. They add more of an emotional effect to their story and their plot, in my opinion. And that again also brings more of an emotional impact to the film for me. And that's something that I like more. I think they do better at with this one than in the first one. I also like that this one was really character driven. This is a very character driven film. And that's something that I think they do that very well in the first one too. And they carry that over in this one. They make you spend a lot of time with these characters, so that you invest in them more, so that when the plot thickens, you're invested a little more, and it has more of a little bit more of an emotional pull to it, because you're more invested with the characters. So you have some characters that are more story driven. The characters kind of take a back seat. They don't necessarily have as much development or character moments to them, because the movie's more story driven. It's more about the story or the experience than it is about the characters. And you have some movies that are much more character driven. There's not a lot to the story, because it's really all on the characters, building the characters, developing the characters. And I feel like this one it's kind of a good balance of both. It is a lot of character, but you also do get a lot of story here as well that has depth to it. I think that the story has something to say. I think it has something to say about religion. I think it has something to say about family, about faith. And yeah, so, that's another thing I do like with the story, is that it's not a bland story. It's not a story that is just mundane with nothing to really offer me. This movie has heart. It's got character. It's got story to it. and it's a coherent script. I think the writing here is also well done, well handled, well written. The script is well written. I think the dialogue is good by the characters. I think the script itself is a coherent script. There's not really any plot holes here or anything. It's handled well. It's thought through. You can tell that the writers, they had a story that they wanted to tell. They put together a good script, and it worked. So I do give it props in the writing department, from character writing to story writing to script writing. It's a very well written film, in my opinion. I would argue that it is. Other positives I have are with the characters themselves. Again, the Warrens, I'm a fan of these characters, at least the movie version of these characters. And I think that they, Patrick Wilson, I said this when I reviewed the first Conjuring movie. Patrick Wilson just has a natural kind of energy about him that he brings to the screen. Really kind of makes you invest in him. He's a very likable guy, just naturally. He has a lot of charm and charisma to him. And I love Patrick Wilson. I can kind of, pretty much watch him in anything. And I think he does really good with this character in this film. I think he kind of adds more layers to his character as well. So his performance is really good. And I think he has a little bit more heart to his character that makes him even more of a likable, amiable guy, in my opinion. So him and Lorraine also, I think she also gets some really good development here for her as well. I think her relationship with Ed gets tested in a number of ways. They have character moments of testing for these characters where they have to make a decision that's going to impact the rest of the film. That's important to me. Is do your main characters have development or testing periods in the film where the plot has kind of this peak moment for the character where their decision is going to dictate or impact the rest of the plot, and their decisions have consequences to them. And for me, I find that the Warrens have that in this film. I do think that they have good character moments of testing, of development here. I think their relationship gets tested, and you feel for them more. By the end of this movie, you're happy for them, and you kind of go through their experience with them. And I just think that both of those characters are well written, and the performances are really well delivered by the actors as well. I also like the Maurice character. I don't know, I guess he was a doctor of some kind. He was a charming lad, and he brought some. I thought he brought some pretty good energy, I guess, to that performance. I always liked him. I don't know why. I can't really pinpoint what it is about him that I like. I like him. I like seeing him on screen. He's a good presence for me. And then Janet, the main girl that is dealing with this possession. She's a girl that and I think James Wan does a really good job directing this movie in a sense that he really makes you feel for this girl. Like you feel bad for her. You see the kind of oppression that she's dealing with, the possession that she's dealing with, and you feel for her. You want her to, make it out. She's got her whole life ahead of her, and you see the pain and the agony that she's, this demon is inflicting on her, and you just want her to be free, man. So I think James Wan does a really good job at making you sympathize for Janet and cheer her on, and try to, you want her to win. you want her to win, and you also you feel bad for her too, because you can relate to the fear that she has. She's afraid of telling people about what she's actually experiencing, because she's afraid of the consequence of what might happen to her if she tells. And typical type of fears that a child would have in that kind of situation, and you feel bad for her, man. And again, that goes back to just adding more heart to the film and adding more of an emotional beat there for me. So all that was positives. I also think another positive for me is in the directing by James Wan, directing the horror in this film. One of my criteria for rating a horror film is the horror itself. Horror and comedies are difficult movies to make. They really are difficult movies to make, because they have a very specific emotion that they're trying to appeal to in the audience, and that is, for horror, the feeling of horror, the feeling of fright, of terror, of fear. And in comedy, it's obviously the emotion of humor and laughter that they're trying to appeal to. So if that's what the movie is trying to be, a horror movie, one of my criteria for rating the movie is, does it succeed in that? Does it succeed in being a horror movie? Does it frighten me? Does it scare me? Are there moments in there that, do something to me? And I do think that this movie succeeds in that. I think James Wan does a very good job directing this horror movie. There are some scenes in the film that really are, make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and just kind of give me the creeps, man. I think anyone who has dealt or had any prior experience with the paranormal, with the supernatural, with demonic forces, can relate. And I think this movie kind of touches a little bit of those emotions that you had in those experiences. For me, I've had multiple encounters, multiple experiences with the paranormal side, and so for me, watching this movie, it's it kind of it brings back some of those memories, and it kind of, this movie is scary, man. It is. And I think especially if you could put yourself in the situation that these characters are in and allow yourself to experience what they're experiencing, I think you can relate to that fear and what they're feeling. And for me, I can do that. And it might partially be due to the fact that, again, I have had experiences with the paranormal, with the demonic, and it is a frightening thing, and so yeah, for me, I do give James Wan props for directing a horror movie well enough to hit that horror feeling for me. And I actually do find this one scarier, to be more frightening than the first one. I think it's partly in the directing, partly is in Valak. Valak is a very, she's a creepy character, and bringing her in, I think, adds to that fear. And then also just the way that Wan directs his movies, a lot of the stuff he's doing with the camera it kind of adds into that. Really good cinematography here. And camera work, camera usage, the working the camera. James Wan does a really good job in this movie with that. I think he improves even in this one from the first one in working the camera, and that's an expression that you'll hear in cinematography is working the camera. And there's a lot that goes into working the camera. Part of it is your lighting, your exposure, but then a lot of it is in the framing and in the movement of the camera. And I think that the way that Wan directs the camera, directs the movie visually, adds layer of horror to the movie for me. So I give him high remarks for his directing in this movie. I thought it was very well directed by James Wan. Also, the way he directs the sound effects, I think also adds tension and adds layer to the fear. I think he directs tension very well in the movie. And yeah, the house design, the production design for this house looks good, looks very much of the time that it was set in. And yeah, just again, very well directed by James Wan. Kudos to him. And I also thought it was well edited. I think this time around, watching it back for this review, the editing was something that I don't know that I probably really paid attention to on past viewings of this movie, but it's something that stuck out. I think maybe because I was very much locked in this time. I was glued. I was very much locked into my viewing experience this time around. I was alert, I was awake, I was focused. I didn't have any distractions going on, so I was really able to sit down and fully kind of zone into the movie. So the editing, I thought, it's a very well edited film. I'll say that. So moving into the negatives here, again, I don't really have much to say in the negatives. There's not really a lot bad with this movie. Just a couple of things. They're minor, kind of minor issues. There's nothing huge that really bothers me with this movie. Just a couple of things. One of them I would say is the rest of the family. I don't know, comes across as likable as the family in the first one. If there's one thing that for me was clearly better in the first Conjuring than the second Conjuring, I would say it's the family. The family that the Warrens are helping in the first Conjuring, I think, are better characters, and they come across more likable, more relatable. They make me invest in them more than the family in this one. The mom in this one isn't really that likable even. I don't like the way, I don't know if it's in the performance or if it was just the way that she was written. I didn't connect, man. She just didn't really do it for me. The other kids, some of the acting was a little weak by a couple of the kids as well. And just the family as a whole, just other than Janet, who was the main girl that we're, kind of pulling for, outside of Janet, I didn't really invest that much with the other members of this family, and not nearly to the level that I did with the family in the first one. So that for me was something that kind of pulled me out a little bit. Is, I was invested with Janet, but a lot of the time you're spending with the rest of the family, and because I wasn't very enamored by them. They just didn't come across very amiable, and I didn't fully connect with the family for me. And then the only other negative I would really have for me, and this one is kind of a big issue, but kind of not. And this kind of ties into what I was saying earlier with how when you make a film that's based on a true story, it can serve as both a positive and a negative. And this is kind of the negative side of what I was talking about, and that is the predictability. Because this is a movie that is based on a true story, and because I was very familiar with this story before I ever saw the movie, I knew about this case. I'd looked to this story in this case. So I was very much aware of it and familiar with it. Because of that, I kind of knew what was going to happen. There wasn't like the tension for me didn't quite land because I kind of knew what was coming. It was kind of a predictable story in that regard. The ending wasn't surprising, and they try to make you. They try to build tension around Ed's character towards the end. They kind of try to give you this foreshadowing. Lorraine has this vision of Ed's death, and they try to lean into that a little bit and build on that to make you feel like Ed could die at the end of this movie. But if you already know about this case, if you already know the story, then Ed's not going to die, right? Because he has to be around to tell the story years later. So the tension that they try to build throughout this movie with Ed and with Janet, it doesn't really work because I know what's coming. I know what happens. I know that they get through it. So that's kind of the negative side of making a film that's based on a true story. Is if you know the story and you know what happens in the story, the movie becomes kind of predictable at that point. And so for me, the third act of this film, when they're trying to build the tension, trying to bring that tension to a climax with Ed and with Lorraine trying to save Ed and Ed trying to save the kid, I that tension didn't land for me because I knew Janet was going to make it out alive and I knew Ed was going to make it out alive. So I was never on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen. I knew what was going to happen. It was predictable for me. So that was kind of the other issue for me with this movie, is that while I appreciate that they were telling a true story, it also does kind of carry a negative side to it because it becomes predictable. Unless they change it up in the writing room, which sometimes that happens, then, they don't do that, then the movie can be pretty predictable. And that's, for me, that was kind of an issue because I wanted to feel that tension. I wanted to be on the edge of my seat, but I wasn't because I knew what was coming. And I knew that, Ed was going to be all right. Janet was going to be all right. So yeah, that's kind of my other negative with the film, but that's basically it. That's kind of all I got for this movie. Love this movie. Conjuring 2, my overall rating here is 4.5 stars, 4.5 out of 5. I love this movie. It is still my favorite of the Conjuring movies, and it's actually still my favorite of the Conjuring universe. Of all the movies in the Conjuring universe, your Conjuring trilogy, your Annabelle trilogy, the 2 Nun movies, Curse of La Llorona, like of all of the movies in the Conjuring universe, Conjuring 2 is still my favorite out of all of them. I love this movie. So yeah, it kind of gives me everything that I want in the film. It gives me a great story. It gives a lot of heart to the story. It, gives me characters that I like. It's very well directed. The cinematography, the production design, the sound effects, all of that is there. So that raises the enjoyment for me with this movie. And it builds on what the first Conjuring movie was. The first Conjuring movie was a great film. I love that movie as well. This one just kind of improves on a few things and just builds on what that first one was. And I think it does it for the most part all in a positive way. So that enhances the experience. So those are my thoughts on Conjuring 2. Again, I understand that I'm likely in the minority that prefer Conjuring 2 over the first one, but those are my reasons for it. I just think it's an improvement on the first one, quality wise, writing wise, more of an emotional heart to it. I think it's scarier, and yeah, it's just overall a better. It's not by, we're not talking, just a huge gap between the first and the second, but I do think that Conjuring 2 is decisively better than the first one. So yeah, that's it. Those are my thoughts on Conjuring 2, man. 4.5 stars. Love this movie. Let me know your thoughts on Conjuring 2 in the comments section. Do you agree with my opinion? Do you disagree? Do you prefer the first one over this one? Let me know anything and everything in the comments section. And until next time, kick it and rock on.